All right, I guess we'll go ahead and get started here today. I see that Donovan is in the room, the Zoom room. All right, so as you are very aware of by now, this is Philosophy 4900. This is week 11. This is going to be our Wednesday lecture. And do I have any announcements? Let me double check before we get rolling on this. Make sure. I want to remind you that you have a discussion targeting vulnerable people this week. The initial post is due by Friday at 11:59 p.m. and you need to respond to 2 classmates by Sunday. Your initial post, make sure that they're at least 250 words in length. And if you use any sources, make sure that you include APA 7 citations and references. And for your replies, they need to be 75 words each. That's the minimum. And once again, if you use any sources or anything like that, make sure you include APA 7 citations and references. All right, then let me get this back to the attendance and we'll get started. We're continuing our topic this week and we're turning now to the insurance industry. Byers and Stanberry, the authors of your textbook, pointed out that insurance is purchased hoping that it is never used. But if it is used, it can help protect the purchaser from experiencing financial hardship. We're pretty familiar, at least in this country, with insurance. Many of us, the ones who have vehicles, are mandated by law to have auto insurance so that if we get into an accident, we are able to provide for that other individual to get their medical care and get their vehicle fixed, etc. There's health insurance, there's homeowners insurance, there's natural disaster insurance, there's business insurance, there's insurance for all kinds of things. And I do know that sometimes people point out that insurance is kind of a scam. Well, it really isn't. But to just look at it, you think, well, I'm paying all this money for something I'm never going to use. People are getting wealthy off of me. No, not necessarily. Because what we do is we all pay in, and the insurance company then takes that money. And when they need to pay out, they've got a pool of money to use to make these payouts. Of course, they're going to invest the money short term, mid-term, long term to increase their profits and also the pool of available money. But the insurance company is betting that you're not going to have to use it. That's what they're hoping for. If everybody that had insurance had to pay out, a lot of insurance companies could actually end up going broke unless they built up enough of a financial base that they could withstand that. To make this industry profitable, the insurer places significant premiums, meaning payments, while placing exclusions and limitations on the policy. So a premium is how much you pay every month for your insurance. Every month I have to pay my auto insurance and my apartment insurance, and every month I pay them. What they do when they write the policy, they put exclusions and limits so that I can't just claim anything I want to. It's got to be within the confines of that particular contract, that policy. There's a constant struggle between the insurance company and the customer, in which the company worries about excessive claims and the customer is concerned about not receiving the payout they need when they need it. Let me be a little more specific there. About the customer's worried about not receiving enough of a payout. So if they get into an automobile accident and you total your car, that means that it would take more money to fix the car than the car is actually worth at that time. Okay. The insurance company, because of these exclusions and limitations, there's a window of money, a zone that they don't have to pay out. And so you as the customer now don't have a vehicle and you can't get one that is comparable to the one you just had because of that. So like when I got my new vehicle, I got gap insurance. And that's that gap that my gap insurance now fits into, so that I literally could walk into the dealership and walk out with a comparable vehicle that day. Now, your textbook did note that given the unpredictable nature of the weather, now we're talking about natural disasters, not just general insurance. It is very difficult to predict when a natural disaster is going to happen. People come up with forecasts. The forecasters, the weathermen, weatherwomen, they come up with forecasts. And forecasts are not always going to be 100% correct. If you've looked at your app on your phone, I look at mine, I look at the weather app on my iPhone. It says that, oh, we're going to get snow on Thursday. Thursday comes, there's no snow. Now, Wednesday, it didn't claim there was going to be any snow, but we have heavy snow. That's because there's so many variables that affect the weather, and the forecasters, when making their predictions, can only do so much. They're at the mercy of the weather patterns themselves. Let me update there we go, that's updated. Climate change has impacted our weather patterns, causing unmitigated natural disasters in recent history. Okay, we've seen that the hurricanes are becoming more intense, that thunderstorms are more intense, that places that don't normally have tornadoes and thunderstorms are starting to have them. Well, that's because of the changes due to climate change. Now, there is also a pattern that the weather follows that's on an annual, and then on an annual basis, then a decade basis, and then like a century basis. And so the weather we're having now may be similar to what it was 100 years ago, but we got climate change, so it makes it more intense. But the weather we're having now may not match what we were having 10 years ago because of these two additional factors. One, the weather patterns do change by the century, by the decade. But climate change has made things more intense. And so it's more difficult for these insurers to be able to predict it. Insurance companies lose profit due to high payout because of natural disasters. Therefore, many companies simply refuse to offer this kind of protection. If you've ever lived in a place that is prone to tornadoes, you can get extra coverage for tornadoes. Well, that's starting to become more of a rarity. What about in areas where you're on a floodplain? Well, flood insurance is becoming more of a rarity as well. Is this an ethical practice? Should the government step in and mandate these companies provide this insurance for natural disasters? Of course, we got to look at the kind of government we have, meaning we got a government that is a capitalistic government. And so it is set for businesses to make money. And in this case, the insurance companies would end up losing money. So perhaps the government wouldn't side on that. So the ethical question remains, what is ethical in this? Now let's consider how the insurance industry discriminates. Byers and Stanbury discussed how the practice known as redlining creates an unethical dilemma. And redlining is the practice of assigning or denying coverage for certain policies such as auto, homeowners, or business insurance based on the geographical neighborhoods where the applicants live, particularly inner city neighborhoods. So what this basically means is your ability to get an insurance policy and the affordability of the premiums is based on your address. They look at the crime rate. They look at the number of policies that they have claims on from that area. If it's an area that's prone to having a lot of claims and has a high crime rate, it's difficult to get insurance. This might sound like a good financial practice because the company doesn't want to accept risks that are, how should I say, something they can avoid. But this does create a discriminatory practice, and it limits certain ethnic or racial groups from obtaining insurance. So if an inner city neighborhood that does have a high crime rate, somebody's there, they have a business, they are of a different race, they apply to get the insurance, they're denied because of their address. And so you see areas with a high concentration of different racial identities having difficulty getting the insurance that they need. And that is a form of discrimination. This is really why this class is important, because we look at the question, is this ethical? Not is it legal, but is it ethical? Is it right to deny somebody coverage based on their address. From a purely financial standpoint, it sounds like it is. But from a human standpoint, we're telling somebody that because of where they live and the majority of the citizens in the area of a particular race, oh, you're not going to be able to get insurance. That is discriminatory. How do we bring these two together so that companies can still mitigate the risk? They can reduce their risk, but they're not practicing discrimination. Statistically, according to Byers and Stanberry, white and black neighborhoods are treated very differently when it comes to insurance. Now we're going to focus on to health insurance because this lecture, we're not going into great depth on each one of these types of insurance, but we're just skimming them. The textbook pointed out that the primary system in America is the multi-payer healthcare system. In this system, both the patient, or I should say employee, so you work for a company, you have health insurance through your company, you're an employee with health insurance, and when you go to the hospital, you stop being an employee and you're a patient. So that's why I put them both there. So both the patient and the company of the person works for pay part of the cost. So if you have health insurance, you go and you have a copayment, which we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but you pay the copayment, so you're paying your share. And then the company, the insurance company that your organization goes through, picks up the rest. But who pays those premiums for that policy? Well, when I worked at the IRS, they picked up a significant part of the premium. I had to pick up part of it, but it was much smaller. So both the company, the organization, the employer, and the employee actually pay on the premium. In a single payer healthcare system, like we see in Britain or in Canada, the majority of the cost is paid out of the tax revenue collected by the government. In this system, the healthcare system is generally operated or facilitated by the government. And so it's a socialized medicine. And in America, that is like saying the worst thing in the world, socialized medicine. Well, there's a lot of good about socialized medicine. You look at the statistics from, well, I go to the Scandinavian countries on this, Sweden, Finland, Norway. You look at them and you see how they have a more of a socialistic yet capitalistic system, because under socialism, you got about 5 different varieties. Some are more capitalistic, some are more communistic, because socialism is not communism. They're totally separate ideologies. So a socialistic country can still be a capitalistic country, or it can be a communistic country. Hopefully I got that clear there. So the people tend to actually report being happier in those countries. They know that if they have a child on the way, both the father and the mother are going to be able to get paid time off from work. They know that if something happens and they need to go to the doctor, it's taken care of. That their education is going to be paid in many of these places through a bachelor's degree. So they're actually being provided for. But the other side is they pay more taxes out of what they earn each year. So the tax rate is higher, but they're getting back a lot more. They don't have to worry about these things. In America, our tax rate, we like, typically as a country, we want to see it lower, but that means that we as a person, an individual, a citizen, need to pay more of the cost of being a citizen in that country versus the government picking up the bill. And so that is a hot topic political debate in America. And I'm just putting on the table what these systems are. Now, in America, both the doctors and the hospitals operate as for-profit businesses in most cases, while those in other systems are governmental organizations, or the doctors work for that governmental organization. Another contributing factor here in America is that we have more physicians per person, and in a greater number, we have a greater number of hospitals and clinics, which creates a faster experience for the patient receiving healthcare. So there's less of a wait. Case in point, for my healthcare, I go through the VA. Okay, that is a socialized medical system. Okay, so I don't pay, but my wait time is generally much longer. I'll show you here. I broke part of one of my teeth, one of my molars, in November. right around Thanksgiving. My appointment to get seen is coming up next month. So you see, that's one of the downsides of a single payer system, is that it takes longer to get the health care that you need. In a multi-payer system, one that is based on capitalism, then we typically are able to get treated quicker. Now, despite this, plus the fact that America spends more on healthcare than other nations, the citizens tend to have worse health. Americans tend to have some of the worst health around the world. We are not a healthy people as a country. And this brings up the ethical dilemma. How do healthcare professionals treat the ever-growing number of American patients? Because with the number of American citizens always growing, and Americans tend to be more unhealthy than other nations, we've got a greater need for healthcare because of that, because we're not taking care of ourselves. How do the healthcare professionals do this? Do we bring more healthcare professionals into the field? That's been the trend for, I'd say, a couple decades. But is that the answer? Does that solve the problem? Now let's look at medication costs. Byers and Stanberry, they discussed prescription medication in America. They cited the Washington Post. They stated, let me move this window over. They stated, in the past 35 years, the only significant victory in the battle to control drug prices has been the enactment of legislation that established the generic drug program at the FDA. So now if you want to go get a particular medication, for not all, but for quite a few of the medications on the list, you're able to get a generic version. It has the same active ingredients. It may have different secondary ingredients, fillers and binders, but it has the same active ingredients and it costs less. Now, having a medical background, I'm going to spill the beans here. In order to have a generic medication, first, a pharmacological company develops the medication. Then they retain the rights to sell it in order to recoup the money they spent in developing it, because it's very expensive to develop new medications. So for 10 years, they're the only ones that can manufacture that medication. No generic versions are allowed. And the prices of these medications can be high. There was a medication I had to take for about a year, and it was about $7,000 a month. And I took it once a day. That's very expensive. There were no generic versions of it because it was in that 10-year window where the manufacturer, that company, had the rights to it. Now, after that 10-year window, now it gets opened up to the public, or not public, but the rest of the industry, and they can begin making the generic versions, and that brings the cost down. The authors went on to claim that prescription drug prices account for 17% of the nation's healthcare costs, up from 7% in the 1980s. So there's been a 10% increase in how much we are spending on prescription medication in this country since the 1980s. So over the last 35, 40 years, we've gone up in our cost. Prescription drug spending accounts for nearly 20% of the total program spending for Medicare. Drug manufacturers, they recoup the expense of developing new medications by charging the patients more. I gave you some examples of that. But it's not just to make them more wealthy. I want to make sure you understand that. In developing these medications, it is very expensive. They have to have teams of scientists. They have to have research facilities. And then when they go into production, they got to do the trials, okay? Then they've got to go and start producing it. And that requires, oftentimes, they develop a new, well, I hate to use the word, but manufacturing line, production line, in order to make that medication. So it is very costly. So they need to recoup it. We can't expect these companies just to foot the bill out, paying for this research and development out of the goodness of their heart, because they'll be broke really quick. And then they will have to close their doors. All the employees will no longer have a job, and they won't be making medications that will be benefiting humanity. So really, we enter into that ethical question, the ethics of it all. Yes, it's ethical for the company to be able to recoup its costs. Yes, it's ethical that they employ the people that they do, but is it ethical that people can't get access to the medications during that time while they're recouping it? Therein lies the conundrum. Now let's talk about efforts to mitigate this. Some unions, labor unions, if you remember back a few weeks ago, we talked about labor unions. Some unions have created healthcare funds for their members. And so if you're going to be a member of this labor union, you contribute to that fund. And that helps to be able to pay the members costs for their health care. So it's kind of a way of almost bringing in the benefits of a single payer system into a multi-payer system environment. Self-reliance is a huge part of the American social image, which makes it the individual's responsibility to take care of their medical expenses. So I have some questions. Does this relate back to the concept of manifest destiny? Manifest destiny was the belief and the attitude that Americans had in the 1800s when they were expanding from the East Coast out towards the West. Now, it did lead to a lot of exploration. It led to America being the size and the shape that it is, but it also led to the mistreatment of Native Americans, to wholesale slaughter of indigenous tribes, the Indian Wars. It was brutal. You hear about Custer's Last Stand. Well, that was during that time, the expansion. So do Americans have this, we do our own improvement? If I need to improve something in my life, I need to reach down, grab myself by the bootstraps, which is a way of saying you grab the top of your boots or shoes and you pick yourself up. That's been the way that Americans typically have approached most things. We come from a colony, a series of colonies that had to survive in a very hostile environment. So we had to learn to be self-reliant. But is that still beneficial today? Because we're not living in that environment anymore. Unfortunately, we decimated most of the indigenous tribes, and it was horrific. That's a horrific part of American history. But we're not living in that time period where we have to be so self-reliant. So do we still need to think that way? Do we need to make decisions that way? And that we talked about America, the second question there. So what about the American charity system acting as a safeguard? Some charities actually offer people an opportunity to come to them and apply to get treatment for themselves or their children for like leukemia or various different, very expensive and costly, problematic diseases and conditions. Is that something, is that a safeguard that Americans should be turning to more? Should we have more of that available? Or is that something that maybe is going contrary to our capitalistic views? These are not things that we need answers to today. These are just the ethical questions that come from this topic. European nations, they have a different approach to healthcare. In America, the population expansion of the 20th century led to more racial discrimination against the ethnic and racial groups immigrating into the nation. Historically, the Irish received a huge backlash of discrimination and poor treatment. The African Americans, we can go down the list, Hispanics, Asians have experienced this discrimination against their ethnicity and their racial group when they immigrated here to America. And as the population grew, this discrimination also seemed to mirror its growth in its intensity. You see a lot of people getting concerned that, oh, there are too many immigrants here now, when they forget that America is nothing but immigrants. The colonists were immigrants into a nation, a series of nations populated by the indigenous tribes. The Europeans were the foreigners. And sometimes I think Americans forget that our forefathers were the immigrants. We need to remember that. Maybe it would give us more empathy. The more modern American approach to healthcare, at least at the organizational level, is for the employees to be offered a selection of different healthcare insurance plans to better meet their needs. So you get a menu that you can choose from, and you're able to pick what premium that you want. Now, a deductible, that is, you pay the premium to the insurance company. Now, if you're getting this from your employer, they pay a portion, you pay a portion, and how much depends on which menu selection you choose. But now I go to the doctor, and now I have a deductible. Before my insurance company will start paying the bill, I have to meet a certain threshold. So if I have it set at $1,000 a year, I owe $1,000 to the doctors through that year. And once I meet that threshold, now the insurance company starts paying on to there. And so that is one way, this is one selection that's there. In America, we've adopted the new practice of the co-payment, and that makes the employee pay a percentage of the cost at the actual counter. Okay. And setting the annual deductible. So we've talked about both those concepts and the predetermined minimum the employee must pay for the health care before the insurance policy begins to cover the cost. That's the deductible. When you have auto insurance, you also have a deductible. Homeowners insurance, you have deductibles in everything. You have to meet a certain obligation. I think this goes right back to the whole thing, the whole idea that Americans should take care of themselves before relying on someone else. I think that goes back to that slide. And the way I see history, that's how I interpret it. Now let's continue talking about the problem here. Your textbook pointed out that in America, the problem is that employers are still faced with huge payments to provide health care for their employees. It's expensive to offer health care. And this has led to outrageous prices, leading both the companies and their employees to experience drastic health-related costs. And some organizations have implemented wellness programs to encourage the staff to become healthier. These can include smoker cessation classes and incentives. So if you're a smoker, they will offer you to be able to go to these cessation classes to stop smoking. And if you succeed, they're going to pay you a certain amount, like $100, $200 gets added into your medication spending account, because I forget what they call that, but you get this like a credit card, and that type of money gets added onto there. So when you go to the doctor, you're able to use that for your copayment. It's a way of helping to cover the copayment cost. Other things that these programs include workout incentives, on-site gyms, on-site cafeterias providing healthier dietary selections. Now, if you look at this, to have an on-site gym, an on-site cafeteria, on-site daycare, whatever it is, costs the organization, and it's one of the benefits that they offer in the compensation package for the employees. It helps to attract quality talent to that organization, and then to retain that talent. These programs, these include some employee privacy concerns. So now we've got these wellness programs, but now my company knows more about my personal and private life. They know if I'm a smoker. They know if I do this. They know if I do that. They know my food selection that I eat. I'm giving up my privacy, which is another thing that Americans tend to really clutch on to, and like it's near and dear, is privacy, personal privacy. I'm giving that up to my organization, to the company I work for, in return for these programs. We now are going to look at the Affordable Care Act of 2010. Yes, this is the controversial portion of this lecture, but we have them from time to time, and we're academics. We can deal with this. Then President Obama signed legislation to provide affordable health care in America. However, this led to criticism from the conservatives, from the right, claiming this was a form of socialized medicine. They saw this as a leftist policy, and thus, given the current political situation in America, we got to wonder, where are we headed to with healthcare? During the first Trump presidency, this act was reduced substantially. What will happen over the next several years? Because there are people that really have benefited from the Affordable Care Act. Will it be done in an ethical way? Or is it going to be based on profit margins? It's going to be based on discrimination. These are questions that really only time is going to answer. And I think in this class, we need to be aware of these things so we know what we're looking at when we see the news. And when you watch the news, yes, you're getting in information, but think about the ethics of it, especially after taking this course. Think critically for yourself. Is this ethical? Is this fair? Would I want to be treated this way? If not, then it's not fair that other people are being treated this way. Now, there have been efforts in different states to try to mitigate this problem. Various states in America have developed their own system to meet this crisis. They seek to force employers to provide health insurance. And this is often done by setting up a single-payer healthcare system in that state. Massachusetts is one that your textbook points out. California, I think, is another one. There's a few of them out there. Is it ethical for the government or organizations to provide health insurance to its employees or citizens? Or should the people be left to take care of themselves? Should the people be forced to grab themselves by the bootstraps and pull themselves up when they fall? Once again, there's no straight answer. But this is something that we look at from an ethical standpoint in philosophy. That does conclude today's lecture. From the individuals in class on Zoom today, are there any questions? Okay.
No.
All right. For those watching the video and for those in the classroom, if you do have questions, feel free to email me. And remember, this is a philosophy course and we're talking about ethics. And so if you have a question, I may not have the answer. I may have a thought process towards coming to or toward an answer, but ultimately the answers you come to really, they're yours. I can help you with the process. I can help you with information. I can help you with theories, etc. But at the end of the day, ethics is a very personal subject, no matter which nation you're from. So anyway, I say that because Americans always pride themselves on being so independent. It doesn't matter if you're from Scandinavia or from America. You've got a perception of the world around you, a perspective. You see things as ethical or non-ethical, unethical. Each person has that ability. So anyway, just bear that in mind. Feel free to contact me, and I'll see you Monday.
All righty. Thank you, Professor.
You have a good day.
You too.
Thank you. Thank you.